Hi, I'm Skinny Cheeks, and this is my Magicka Necromancer DPS guide. Magicka Necros are one of the most sought after DPS classes in the game. Not only do they have really great damage, but also bringing the unique major vulnerability debuff will typically mean at least a few spots reserved for Necromancers on a trial roster. They have very respectable single target damage, but AoE is where they really shine and they just might be the best in the game at it. Before we get started, huge thanks to Ling for helping me out with this one. He is insane on Necromancer and shared some really great parses and ideas with me that are included in this video. Really appreciate it. So for this video, I'll go through the top races, our Mundus Stone, the food, drinks, and potions we'll be using, champion points, our gear options, our skill bars, some rotations, including some tips for easier static versions, and then we'll end with several clips of these setups in action on the trial dummy from both Ling and myself. One quick thing before we start, if you want to see how you can help support this channel and keep these guides coming, stop by my Patreon page. I'll have a link in the description. There are ways to support for as little as $3, and it really does help. I can't thank you all enough that have already helped out. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. The top race options are Khajiit, High Elf, and Dark Elf. The difference in these three is really tiny. Just a couple of missed light attacks or mess ups in a rotation will make more of a difference than which race you choose out of the top three from a damage standpoint. And even if you decide to not go with one of the top three, unless you're trying to get high scores, you can clear any content at a high level with any race option. My personal preference right now is Khajiit, as the damage levels are really good, and they also get a little boost to their health and recovery to go along with it. For the Mundus Stone, we'll be going with the Thief. Shadow is really close, and I think if you're pairing two crit sets together like Mother Sorrow and Medusa, probably the better option. With most other setups though, we have access to so much crit damage now though, it's hard to pass up the Thief. For food, I do recommend Bistat Health plus Magicka if you are able to sustain it. It offers great damage with a lot of health. There is no recovery bonus though, so you will be relying on your group a lot for sustain. If that's not cutting it, for a big boost to sustain and just slightly less damage, you can also go with Ghastly Eyeball. This has no health bonus on it, so depending on what content you're doing, you might be a little bit squishy. However, Necromancer can get away with this a little easier than some other classes since they do have a health boost included in their passes. A nice middle ground between these is Clockwork Citrus Fillet. This is a little more expensive but gives some health, magicka, and recovery. Not quite as much damage as either of the other options though, due to the lower magicka pool. There is also a cheaper version called Witch Mother's Potent Brew. The stats on it aren't the greatest, but if gold is an issue, you can run this as well. For our potions, we're using the standard spell power potions. For our champion points, I'll go through the slottables here, but for a full guide for setting up all of your champion points, make sure to check out the video I made for Blackwood. I cover several leveling routes and milestones to hit. The slottables we'll be taking are Backstabber, Master at Arms, Biting Aura, and then for that fourth spot, it is really close between Deadly Aim and Fighting Finesse. I think if you're going with a spammable rotation that uses Ricochet Skull, you might squeak out a little bit more with Deadly Aim, but for a more dot heavy rotation and for more AoE damage, I'd recommend Fighting Finesse. For those situations where you can't slot Backstabber, easy choice to just slot both Fighting Finesse and Deadly Aim. For our gear, I'll go through several setups here, which do include some options for those who don't have access to trial gear yet. We'll go through some boss setups, AoE setups, and also a solo build. So I won't be going through the specifics of what each of these sets do. For more info on that and some other good options that might not be listed here, make sure to check out my top Magicka DPS sets video. I go through all the top monster sets, arena sets, and 5-piece sets and read through what they do. Alright, so the first setup we'll go through is the more stationary setup. We'll be doing a 1-piece Slimecraw, 5-piece Mother Sorrow, the Harpooner's Waiting Kilt, and then the Mantle of Siroria for our front bar set, and the Maelstrom Inferno Staff for our back bar set. For the front bar, daggers can squeak out a little more damage if you can stand in melee for the entirety of the fight, but if you have to dip into ranged at all, definitely go with the staff. You can also do Bahsei on the body, and Elemental Catalyst is a must if someone isn't already running it in your group. The set is about the same damage as Mother Sorrow. It is redundant though to have more than one person wear it since it buffs the whole group. The Skeletal Arcanist will not proc the shock portion of this set though, so make sure to either have a shock enchant on your back bar or swap to the Mystic Siphon morph of your Siphon instead of Detonating Siphon. The Frost and Flame portions are easily kept up with your standard abilities. For fights where the kilt is not usable, swap your Sorrow shoulders to your legs and then either slot a 1-piece crit to your shoulders or drop Slimecraw altogether for a 2-piece monster set. Or another option is to move your Siroria ring to your leg slot and put on a Death Dealer's Fate ring. Okay, for this next setup, for the more mobile setup, it's pretty similar, except Bahsei is our first choice for our body set for the front bar set, and we'll go with Diamonds, Victory, or Medusa. Everything is set up the same way though, and the same things apply when the kilt is unusable. Alright, now we'll go through some AoE setups. The first one is for short burst encounters. We're doing a 3-piece False God or Siroria. Back bar set will be Burning Spellweave, the Harpooner's Waiting Kilt on the legs, and then Mechanical Acuity for the front bar set. When choosing between Lightning and Inferno, if you can be in melee for the Ad Wave, Flame Pulsar does do really nice damage, but I think I prefer Shock Ring when you are at range. They're both very close either way though. When choosing between Nirn or Precise for the staff, or False God or Siroria for the 3-piece, it kind of depends on how long past the Mechanical Acuity proc that the fights are tending to linger on for. The spell damage you get from Nirn and Siroria is better while the Acuity proc is going, but the crit from False God and Precise is better after the buff falls off. Both are good options though. You can also do a Master's Lightning Staff here. If you run it, you'll drop False God or Siroria and run a 1-piece Slimecraw or Balorg. Same decision making here between the Slimecraw or Balorg here as with the Nirn or Precise Staff. Just make sure if you do this that you don't hit with any direct damage until you're ready to proc Acuity, since it will no longer be only on your front bar. Then fights where the kilt is unusable, swap the False God or Siroria head or shoulders to your legs and then slot a 1-piece Slimecraw or Balorg instead. Or move the Acuity ring to the leg slot and put on the Death Dealer's ring. Okay, our next AoE setup is for medium length encounters. A 1-piece Slimecraw again, then Bahsei is our first choice for the body set, Harpooner's Waiting Kilt on the legs, Diamonds Victory or Medusa for the front bar, and Maelstrom Inferno on the back bar. You'll notice this is very similar to our second boss setup, so if you are unable to quickly change gear between trash and bosses, this might be the way to go for you, since this type of setup works very well for both. Alright, then our third AoE setup is really great for 15 to 25 second encounters where you're able to use a Destro ultimate. Same 1-piece Slimecraw, Bahsei, and Kilt, but Elfbane is our back bar set and Master's Lightning is our front bar set. If you don't have the Master's Lightning Staff, you can run a Willpower front bar, or if you aren't running Bahsei and are instead running Sorrow or Diamond's Victory, you can front bar that set and then do a 3-piece False God with this, similar to how we had on our first AoE setup. Really lots of good options here. And then our final AoE setup is one that Ling shared that is really nice for short to medium length encounters, so long enough to take advantage of the Elfbane Destro, but not so long that Acuity is a bad option. Kind of right in that sweet spot in between. 2-piece Balorg is really nice because it'll buff the full duration of our Destro ult with Elfbane, and then we do end up with a 1-piece left over, so we are running the Armor of the Trainee set for a little higher max health. If you're doing this setup without the kilt, you can run a second Trainee piece for a little more magicka, or move the ring to the legs and then slot the Death Dealer ring. Alright, finally I'll go through my solo setup. So we'll do either a 1-piece Falcon Scoria or a 1-piece Slimecraw. So if you're doing overland content or solo arenas, typically you'll get enough penetration for most of it with the Slimecraw piece, because overland mobs only have 9100 armor and solo arena mobs vary, but usually aren't the full 18,200 armor that dungeon and trial enemies have. However, if you are trying to do something like solo a 4-man dungeon, the Falcon piece will be a little bit better to get closer to the pin cap. For the body set, we really have a few good options here, either Mother's Sorrow, False God's Devotion, or Bahsei's Mania. Mother's Sorrow or False God are probably the easier to just set and forget kind of sets, and then Bahsei should have the higher ceiling though if you do want to push out a little more damage. And then we'll be doing the Ring of the Pale Order. This is just super convenient in a solo setup as it allows you to just go full damage without having to worry about healing yourself or slotting a shield. Then for our front bar set, we'll go with either Diamond's Victory or Medusa, and then a Maelstrom Inferno staff on the back bar as usual. If you don't have that Maelstrom staff yet, the normal one is pretty much just as good as the perfected, and normal Maelstrom Arena is not too difficult to run. But in the meantime, you can just slot another staff of whatever set you decided to front bar. And then if you don't want to use the Pale Order ring, you can slot a different mythic ring, or move your Diamond's Victory or Medusa chest piece to that ring slot, and then slot whatever other mythic you want, or do a 2-piece monster set instead of the 1-piece. Alright, now we'll go through the skills. So first we'll go through a couple of boss focused setups and then an AoE setup. The first setup is what Ling used in his dot heavy rotations. On the front bar we have Boneyard, Degeneration, Detonating Siphon, Stalking Blast Bones, Inner Light, and Shooting Star. And then on the back bar we have Unstable Wall, Mystic Orb, Barbed Trap, Skeletal Arcanist, Scalding Rune, and Fiery Rage. So some notes about this setup. Barbed Trap can be replaced with whatever other skill you need if you're running Medusa. Scalding Rune or Inner Light can be replaced with a shield or a heal if you need one. Ling slightly prefers to lose Inner Light here as it keeps the rotation the same and loses a little less damage than dropping Rune. Fiery Rage should be replaced with Colossus if you're on major vulnerability duty for your group. And then the Colossus can also be front barred if you aren't casting Meteor for a little more crit chance and execute from the Death Knell passive. And one more note that I didn't write here, when I did this setup for my easy static dot rotation, I did swap Boneyard to my back bar and Archer to my front bar. It is a tiny bit less DPS this way, but I found the rotation to flow a little better for me personally. Maybe that's just me, but if you are having a little trouble with a setup like this, you could try making that swap. It's not really a huge difference either way. Alright, this next setup is for situations where you want a spammable ability in your rotation. I used this one in a number of my parses that I have at the end. Front bar we have Inner Light, Stalking Blast Bones, Detonating Siphon, Ricochet Skull, Skeletal Arcanist, and Shooting Star. And then on the back bar we have a flex spot, so Detonating Siphon if you don't need anything else, Boneyard, Unstable Wall, Mystic Orb, Barbed Trap, and Fiery Rage. Similar notes here, Barbed Trap can be replaced if you are running Medusa, and then the back bar Siphon can be whatever you need, or also you can add in Scalding Rune here for an extra dot if you're feeling a little spicy, and then Fiery Rage will be replaced with Colossus if you are on major vulnerability duty, and then as I mentioned with Ling's setup, you can swap Boneyard and Arcanist for slightly more damage if you want. I just prefer the feel of the rotation with Boneyard on the back bar. Now I'll go through the AoE skills. Front bar we have Boneyard, Flame Pulsar or Shock Ring, Detonating Siphon, Stalking Blast Bones, Inner Light, and Colossus. Back bar is Unstable Wall, Mystic Orb, Skeletal Arcanist, Proximity Detonation, Channeled Acceleration, and Fiery Rage. For choosing between Shock Ring and Flame Pulsar, as I mentioned in the gear, this will kind of come down to preference and also if you can stand in melee or not. Because Pulsar has a higher innate chance to proc burning, and then the afterburn effect comes from hitting burning enemies with Pulsar, it can be a very strong AoE ability if you can stand up inside the pack. But if you do have to stand back, I think I slightly prefer Shock Ring. They are both really close either way though, so try out both if you want, see which one works out better for you. If you are running a Master's Lightning Staff, you will replace that ability with Shock Clench. And then you can drop Channeled Acceleration for whatever you need, like Necrotic Potency if you're running Medusa. Proxy Det can be dropped for whatever you need if you can't stand in melee range. And then Necrotic Potency is a great skill to swap on if possible after enemies die, or you can drop your least needed skill for it and just keep it on your bars. Alright, now I'll go through the rotation. So I'll start with Ling's dot rotation. So we've tried to simplify the format a little bit compared to the last video, so hopefully this way is a little easier to understand. Don't worry though, I do have a 12-second static version and a slightly easier spammable rotation coming up as well if this one's a little too difficult. This first one shown here will have the highest damage ceiling of these though. For the pre-buff section, if you are using Bahsei's Mania, Siege Shield is great to swap onto your bar to dump your Magicka and then swap back off. And then if you aren't pre-casting Channeled Acceleration, you'll want to add in Barbed Trap to the pre-buff section as well. So we'll open up with the Skeletal Arcanist, Blast Bones, and then our ultimate. If you want to do a little more advanced opening, Ling recommends standing further back before you start to have a little more time before the Blast Bones and Orb's first hit go off. And then the remaining rotation breaks down to Unstable Wall, Blast Bones, Boneyard, Mystic Orb, Blast Bones, 2 flex spots, Blast Bones, 1 flex spot, and then back to Unstable Wall where it repeats. So what goes in that flex spot? It could be your ultimate, the Mage, Barbed Trap, Detonating Siphon, Scalding Rune, or Degeneration. Really just depends on what is running out at the time. With this rotation, you'll want to try to keep them all up as much as possible and have to watch your ability timers to see when they're getting close to running out and then recast them in those flex spots. The priority is here to help you decide what to cast if they are running out near the same time. And then another option you can do, since this is a 9-second rotation, when you need an extra dot recast beyond the 3 flex spots there, before you go back into that first 5 skill static portion of the rotation, you can just add in an extra flex to make it a 10-second rotation. So the rotation can kind of bounce back and forth between 9 and 10 seconds depending on what is ready to recast or not. This definitely isn't the easiest to master, but for the top damage potential, casting skills dynamically while also getting as many blast bones out as possible is going to be the best way to go. And then a few more notes. So for the end of the rotation, the very end, when there isn't enough time left before the boss dies to refresh all your dots again, you can cycle through Blast Bones, Unstable Wall, Detonating Siphon, and Scalding Rune, since these all have hard-hitting direct damage components. Just make sure not to overcast the Blast Bones or the runes, since those need at least 2 abilities in between them each time you cast them to activate their direct damage. And then finally, for a quick rundown of my static rotation I did with the all dot setup, it still got really good results, but is not going to be the most optimal route. I did Blast Bones, Boneyard, Unstable Wall, Blast Bones, Detonating Siphon, Mystic Orb, Blast Bones, Barbed Trap, Scalding Rune, Blast Bones, Degeneration, Skeletal Archer. So some of the pros for doing it this way are it's easy to do without timers. There's lots of Blast Bones cast since you're always doing it every third ability, and then good uptimes on many of your dots. And then for the negatives to it, Skeletal Arcanist, Scalding Rune, and Barbed Trap are all refreshed earlier than they need to be. Unstable Wall, Boneyard, and Orb are all refreshed 2 seconds later than they need to be. And then there is a lot of bar swapping involved. Unfortunately, with this many dots going, there really isn't a way around all the bar swapping without sacrificing a lot of Blast Bones damage. So this fully static one is a little bit oversimplified. I'm sure a lot of you could take some of these abilities and cast them more dynamically instead of just every 12 seconds. Like Barbed Trap every 12 seconds is pretty overcast, but one thing you can do to work from this static one towards that dynamic one is to just choose some abilities that you want to keep static and others that you want to keep dynamic. So maybe like kind of a hybrid between the two setups until you're more and more comfortable with more abilities being fully dynamic. But I know not everyone has time to practice for hours on end, and I get that. So if the static one is better for you in your situation, definitely go for it. Okay, so this next rotation will be for when you're using a spammable ability. It is mostly the same as Cursed's rotation that you guys may recognize from previous videos. So again, you can use Siege Shield to dump your Magicka if you're using Bahsei. For the opening, we're casting Blast Bones, Skeletal Arcanist, and Barbed Trap. If you do pre-buff Channeled Acceleration, then after that, you'll only cast the Skeletal Arcanist for this opening section and then move straight to the remaining section. And then also, if you do go that route, ignore the very first light attack on Blast Bones and start your light attack weaving with Boneyard. So the rotation throughout is going to be Blast Bones, Boneyard, Unstable Wall, Detonating Siphon, Blast Bones, Orb, Skull, Blast Bones, Skull, Skull. So this setup just leaves us with a few abilities that we have to keep up dynamically, which are the Barbed Trap, our Skeletal Arcanist, and our Ultimate. So you'll just replace one of your skulls with one of those abilities whenever it needs to be refreshed. And then for the very end of the fight, when the boss will die before you have time to refresh your dots, you'll just spam Blast Bones, Skull, Skull, Blast Bones, Skull, Skull, etc. If you need to, you can delay your rotation slightly to refresh your archer or trap if you notice you're entering the long section of the rotation and something will be falling off for a long time. For example, if I get to that third skull cast and I see, oh crap, my archer only has 2 seconds left, better to go ahead and refresh that archer there than to have it down that whole time you're doing that first half of the rotation. Scalding Rune is a really nice skill to add into the rotation if you're comfortable with it. You can just do it in place of one of your skulls and do it dynamically, or you can replace the first skull and do it every time in that spot in the rotation for a more static version. Just be careful with your archer and trap dots doing it like this, since you essentially only have 2 flex spots for them at that point if you are casting Scalding Rune in a static spot. And then finally, you can also make this rotation fully static by alternating the Arcanist and Barbed Trap every other rotation in that first Ricochet skull spot. You do lose a little bit of uptime on your Arcanist and Barbed Trap this way, but it does make it fully static. And then one final little note, if you are front barring Boneyard and back barring your Arcanist, the order of the skills is the same, but your bar swapping points will be just slightly different. Alright, that's going to do it for this guide. I want to give a big thanks to my current Patreon supporters. If you'd like to see how you can help support the channel through Patreon, I'll have a link in the description below. And a special thanks to Nicholas, Simon, Privy League Guild on PlayStation's EU server, Cougar's Bay and the Cougar Town Guild, Gandalf Legris, Stridig, and Delta. I'll close this one out with a few parses from Ling and myself using the setups showcased. Thank you so much for stopping by. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Transaction